This is no time for self-doubt. Or is it? Action.
Electability. What is it? Who has it? And can I put it in my mouth? For the first time in forever, we have not one, but two left-wing populists who are viable candidates to be president. Mom and dad don't agree on everything, but what they do agree on is pretty big. Tax the hell out of the rich, expand government programs for the working class, and give this guy a wedgie whenever possible. More importantly, both of them have built their campaigns on this revolutionary idea that the ultra-wealthy shouldn't be in charge. Whether it's healthcare or banking or climate change, both mom and dad start from the premise that corporate interests are usually at odds with the public interest, and that the function of the state is to take power away from the ultra wealthy and give it back to the working class. That's a pretty big idea. One that fundamentally challenges the way our economy has worked for a while. But instead of asking whether this idea is good, media coverage has focused on a very different question.
Are Democrats snatching defeat from the jaws of victory by moving too far to the left?
Too far to the left.
Too far left.
Too liberal, too socialist.
The definition of unelectable.
It's more than winning the primary. It's about who's going to be able to take on President Trump.
Personally would worry that somebody too far to the left would end up isolating the center and the middle.
The defining question of the defining question of the Democratic primary hasn't been about values or goals. It's been about electability. Democrats are blowing this election. Bernie Sanders is a risk we can't run. Elizabeth Warren wants to lose your vote. I made cynicism my entire personality. There's this assumption in the media that America is a center-right country. But is that actually true? If you look at the big progressive ideas on the left, tax the rich, Medicare-for-All, free college, break up the banks, they all poll pretty well. And it's not just specific policies either. A study of public opinion in 2018 found that we're the most friendly towards government regulation, higher taxes, and government programs that we've been in 60 years. Sorry, Grandma. We're communists now. Plus, this whole idea of losing moderates is weird. Nobody really knows what moderates are. Independent and swing voters are kind of all over the place politically. Now look, maybe there is some big group of Rust Belt centrists who love rich people. I'm not a political scientist, but I've noticed that neither are the people making this argument on TV. When Chris Matthews or Joe Scarborough warn about moving too far left, they're not citing polling data. They're just kind of asserting a truth about American politics. And the thing is, they're not doing it to both parties. A study last year found that far left framing was used way more in cable news than far right framing. So, what's going on here? We are living through one of the most ideologically extreme presidencies in a lifetime. So why is it the Democrats who challenge corporate interests who get all the flack?
You run the risk, if you push far to the left, that you're going to lose the middle. Those people in the middle don't want to support people on the far left. They're capitalists. They believe in the American dream, and they want to be rich.
What's wrong? Getting spooked?
To understand where a bias comes from, you should look at what the people who hold that bias have in common. Actually, this part's gonna get a little bread tubey, so 1 second. There we go. One of us. One of us. So, what do Chris Matthews, Joe Scarborough, and the rest of the cable news hosts have in common? What trait do all the cable news hosts worrying about too far left share? Any guesses? No, it's not that they're Jewish. What is with YouTube commenters and the Jews? Don't you guys get tired of smelling your own farts? Can you guys redirect your rage at a real problem? Like capitalism? Their common trait is that they're multimillionaires, Brenda. Nearly every cable news host on TV is either a multimillionaire or well on their way to becoming one. Joe Scarborough makes $8 million a year to do his show. Chris Matthews, $5 million. George Stephanopoulos, $15 million. A lot of cable news hosts are wealthy well before they get on TV. CNN's Aaron Burnett is a former Goldman Sachs person, married to a managing director at Citibank. MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle is a former banking executive who got hired by MSNBC despite having no journalism background. And Andrea Mitchell is married to Alan Greenspan, former Federal Reserve Chairman and one of the architects of the 2008 financial crisis.
Do you have any personal responsibility for the financial crisis?
Let me give you a little history.
The guests who get invited to talk about Democrats moving too far left aren't much better. When they're not just straight up Republicans, which they often are, seriously, they often are, they're typically wealthy political consultants, like James Carville, a man who's made a career out of lecturing Democrats for being out of touch.
I'm afraid that Donald Trump is going to get reelected. I'm not about a revolution.
While living in a multi-million-dollar nightmare dollhouse. Don't eat the rich. Don't eat the rich. Don't eat the rich. Don't eat. The problem isn't just on TV, though. A recent study found that papers like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal were dominated by graduates of elite universities, finding that elite journalists resemble senators, billionaires, and World Economic Forum attendees in terms of educational attainment. Jesus Christ. One way of interpreting this data is that all the smartest pundits also happen to be rich. That wealthy elites dominate the media because they have access to some special wisdom about the world. Another way of looking at it is that working class people are systematically shut out of mainstream media. That the Overton window is being steered by pundits whose lives look nothing like most Americans. Former bankers and political operatives who spend their nights attending swanky press parties and rubbing shoulders with the DC establishment. Now, am I saying that members of the wealthy elite can't be trusted to comment on American politics? What I'm saying is that these pundits have class interests, and those interests shape their idea of what too far left is. If you've never struggled to afford insulin or pay for college, the idea of taxing the rich to make those things free probably sounds ridiculous. And if all your friends are bankers and politicians, the idea of a revolution against the ruling class doesn't just sound silly, it probably sounds threatening. Listen to who Stephanie Ruhle is worried about when she interviews Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders does stand for that person who's struggling, who wants to rise up. But what about that affluent person? Are they welcome in your modern family?
They're sure are.
Do they know that?
Would you ask that question if you weren't a former banking executive? After Bernie won the most votes in Iowa, Chris Matthews had a meltdown on live TV.
I have my own views of the word socialist. I remember the Cold War. I believe if the Reds had won the Cold War, there would have been executions in Central Park, and I might have been one of the ones getting executed.
To be clear, Matthews is a paranoid weirdo with a bad case of brainworms. But all he's doing here is saying the quiet part out loud. He's not worried about Sanders because Sanders is too far left. He's worried about Sanders because he knows which side of the revolution he would be on.
Bernie Sanders saying, the country's corrupt, our system's corrupt. Be careful about that language, that our system of politics is corrupt. That's too strong.
To be fair, the problem really isn't individual pundits. It's much deeper than that, which reminds me. Oh yeah, baby. I call this color Central Park Bloodbath. In America, every major news network is owned by a huge corporation. NBC is owned by Comcast, CNN by AT&T, and ABC by Disney. If they're not owned by a huge corporation, they survive by selling ads to huge corporations.
Rachel Maddow, sponsored by Lincoln Aviator.
New Day, brought to you by Insure.
One Big Thing, sponsored by BP.
In other words, if you are a news organization in the US, your survival kinda depends on not angering corporate interests. Any reasonable person would look at that situation and say, maybe don't trust these people to fairly cover anti-corporate candidates. But when Bernie Sanders made that argument about the Washington Post, which is owned by Amazon's Jeff Bezos,
any wonder why the Washington Post is not one of my great supporters. I wonder why.
Corporate media called him a conspiracy theorist.
This is a very serious claim with no evidence, and it is echoing what the president says.
The same thing happened when a Bernie surrogate made a similar point to CNN's Brian Stelter.
In about 2 minutes or so, you're going to cut to commercial breaks and you're going to see some pharmaceutical ads. And what that ends up doing is incentivizing you to make sure that you're driving the conversations in certain areas and not in certain areas.
What evidence do you have of that? I actually don't see the commercials. I don't know what runs.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but Brian Stelter isn't totally wrong here. Look, no CNN executive is telling Stelter to go easy on big corporations, just like no one is telling Jimmy Fallon to keep it light. They have their jobs because no one has to tell them, because their ideas don't threaten their boss's financial interests. In his book, Necessary Illusions, media critic Noam Chomsky writes, CNN is for bootlickers, and Jeff Zucker is a little bitch boy. I'm kidding, he doesn't say that. What he actually says is, those who occupy managerial positions in the media or gain status within them as commentators belong to the same privileged elites and might be expected to share the perceptions, aspirations, and attitudes of their associates, reflecting their own class interests. Journalists entering the system are unlikely to make their way unless they conform to these ideological pressures, generally by internalizing the values. In other words, corporations pick a president who will advance their corporate interests, those presidents hire employees who won't threaten corporate interests, and then those employees go on TV and swear that they independently decided the working class was asking for too much. This is why everyone on TV looks the same. Not because they have some wisdom about American politics, but because rich elites probably aren't going to question the economic and political systems that put them in power. When Rachel Maddow spends night after night on Russian interference, or CNN loses its mind over another Trump tweet, it creates the illusion of progressive thought without challenging the everyday exploitation that corporate capitalism enacts on the working class. Jesus, I sound like a fucking grad student. Okay, look, if this sounds conspiratorial, and it probably does, ask yourself this. Why are there dozens of multimillionaires on TV, but no socialists? Why are there multiple news networks devoted to the stock market and corporate mergers, while most newsrooms don't have a single labor reporter? Why is it that the head of the New York Times opinion section feels compelled to say, "We are pro-capitalism. The New York Times is in favor of capitalism"? Is it because there are no serious thinkers who think we need an economic or political revolution? Or is it because those serious thinkers don't last very long in corporate media? By the way, if you're wondering what the commercials were after that Brian Stelter segment, pharmaceutical company, bank, pharmaceutical company, brought to you by Amazon.
The Democratic Party is in crisis right now. Trump is going to devour every one of these candidates if they can't say they support capitalism. Yes,
if you're so sure we're full of shit, then why are we still in your head?
Capitalism has to be reformed from time to time. But my God, if you're afraid to say you're a capitalist, let me let you in on a little secret. You're going to lose in 2020. Just, you know what? Pull up the stakes on the tent and just pack her up. The party's over.
Were you watching Morning Joe? I think I'm freaking out. Yeah, I noticed. What if they're right? I mean, we only get one shot at this. Do we really want to risk losing swing voters in Ohio? Now? Are we being naive? The long, dark night of the end of history has to be grasped as an enormous opportunity. The very oppressive pervasiveness of capitalist realism means that even glimmers of alternative political and economic realities can have a disproportionately great effect. The tiniest event can tear a hole in the gray curtain of reaction, which has marked the horizon of possibility. From a situation in which nothing can happen, suddenly anything is possible. What the hell is that? It's a famous quote. I thought you'd like it. I don't need your grad school bullshit right now. I'm freaking out. Dude, are you seriously getting spooked by the lizard people on cable news? They're paid to be dumbasses. But what they're saying isn't dumb, okay? This isn't a left-wing country. Says who? You don't know what motivates people until you give them a chance to vote for it. If you're constantly worried about losing the establishment, you'll never give voters a chance to throw them out. That's not how politics works, okay? You can't just make something realistic by asserting that it is. Bullshit. That's exactly how it works. The New Deal, the Civil Rights Act, gay marriage, everything cool we have ever done seemed too far left at the time. And then suddenly, it wasn't. But Obama says that we shouldn't. Who the fuck cares what Obama says? Just because your heroes got rich and scared doesn't mean you have to. But I am scared. Okay? I am scared. So am I. We all are. We're going up against the final boss. It's supposed to be scary. Fighting for a better world is scary. What if we're wrong about this? Then we'll find out for ourselves. But I'm not taking orders from the monkeys on MSNBC anymore. And what if we lose? What if we win? Seriously. What if we win? You're an idiot. Maybe. You good? Yeah, I'm fine. Good. You ready? Yeah. I'm ready.